The views expressed in this interview are those of the individuals and do not reflect the official policy or position of the U.S. government, the Department of Defense, the U.S. Navy, or the Naval Postgraduate School.
One day, in the summer of 2019, I was living the Marine Corps dream. I was in command of a firing cannon battery on deployment aboard ship with my Marines. And I should have been happy, but on this particular day, I was furious. What had me so upset, you might wonder? Well, it's the Marine Corps, so it could have been a myriad of things like DTS, long formations in the well deck, or dealing with recent Liberty incidents. But this time, it was pro-con marks. A bit more specifically, it was the fact that the battalion sergeant major and CO had changed my Marines' marks after I submitted them and without informing me. I only realized this after they were officially published in MOL and could no longer be altered. Needless to say, I wasn't happy. And frankly, I was probably wearing that attitude a little too loudly on my sleeve in conversations with my staff and officers. It was then that I received a surprising comment from a staff NCO that it honestly shocked me. "It doesn't really matter, sir," he said. "Doesn't matter? How could this not matter? We worked hard to ensure our Marines received the appropriate marks in accordance with the IRAM. We tried to ensure the quality spread seemed right, fighting score inflation. And after all, these marks were important to the Marines, right? It's one of the major factors in getting promoted." I said as much to the staff NCO, and he answered that the proficiency and conduct marks didn't affect the Marines' cutting score for promotion all that much. A 0.1 or 0.2 change in proficiency accounted for only 5 or 10 points towards a Marine's score. That might be enough to shift a Marine's promotion a month or two, but those points could easily be made up by increasing by 1 or 2 pull-ups on the PFT, say. As a battery commander, I didn't really like that answer. There was nothing I could do after the fact, but I, like many others, enjoy the occasional fight I can't win, especially if it's for my Marines. I also felt that it didn't matter if the effect was large or small. It was the principle of the thing. But the prior enlisted Marine in me also knew that he was right. I recall receiving better than average pro-con marks back in my day, but what I knew back then was that the ticket to getting promoted fast was not being the best at my MOS. It was nailing a high score on the PFT. Even though I was still fuming over the pro-con mark fiasco, I couldn't help but go back to my cabin and do a little math. I wanted to know exactly how much each factor of the cutting score mattered. I was after what I would like to now call promotion elasticity. What is elasticity, you might ask?
And elasticity basically is the percentage change in quantity for every unit percentage change in the price. But elasticity is unit invariant, so it doesn't matter that you're looking at a $1 change or because it's percentage change.
That was Marigee Bacolod, an economics professor here at MPS, and we're going to use the economics approach to try to answer this question about incentives for promotion, as well as other closely related topics like retention and recent updates to the Marine Corps Junior Enlisted Evaluation System.
Welcome to the Trident Room, brewer of stout conversation, unfiltered and on tap. On today's episode, the Trident Room podcast senior producer, Mike Wish, sits down and has a conversation with Professor Bacolod, Major Alex Ryan, and Major Rob Wells.
How is it that I can have the responsibilities of a major or a captain and still just be paid as a first lieutenant?
Why doesn't the Marine Corps promote officers within their MOS instead of farming it out to the entirety of the officer corps?
Why does our performance evaluation system for junior Marines rely so heavily on non-job performance MOS things?
Do the Marine Corps have merit-based promotions? The Army does. So why does not the Marines?
Why doesn't the Marine Corps do rate tests like the Navy or Air Force?
So there's a lot going on here. We all have our complaints and criticisms, but very few of us are actually in the problem, looking for solutions. So we're going to need some help.
So my name is Major Alex Ryan. I am a operations research analyst, but primarily what I do is data science for Marine Corps Manpower and Reserve Affairs.
And Ryan, what qualifies you to do such work?
So I graduated with the 8850 designation, which is a degree in operations research under the GSOIS college there at NPS.
So definitely a solid educational background there coming from MPS, but he isn't the only one that's going to help us out today.
So Major Rob Wells, I'm the JPES section OIC.
And what is JPES, you might ask? Well, that is the new junior enlisted performance evaluation system, which Rob helped field and has been up and running for over a year now. And why did we move away from the legacy system? What was the biggest factor that drove the change?
Several things. One of them being transparency, right? So the pro-con system in MOL really doesn't provide the Marine a whole lot when they get the output, right? So there's under the legacy system, they got a number, 4.2, 4.3. Some of the research that they found was that by and large, Marines were getting the exact same pro-con marks within a very narrow margin.
So a very narrow distribution with little variance is a problem because we can't differentiate performance in the way we'd like. As we dive deeper into this problem and others, we're going to find that we need some tools, a framework for deciding what the costs and benefits are for any system. I think the Economist's Toolkit is the right one for the job. So let's go back and visit Professor Bacolod again, get to know her a little bit better, and see what she has to offer.
Okay, I am Marigee Bacolod. I'm an economist, and I am an associate professor of economics at the Graduate School of Defense Management. I'm also the academic associate of the Manpower Systems Analysis curriculum. I joined NPS in 2014, and prior to that, I was an assistant professor at UC Irvine, and then in the Department of Economics, and I was adjunct faculty at Cal Poly in San Luis Obispo.
Okay, so Professor Bacolod is just barely qualified to help us out here. Professor, we're not dealing with markets and prices here, so how can economics help us approach the kind of problems that we're addressing, and how does an economist's view apply to the world in general?
It offers this general framework for really viewing the world. Like if you want to understand something, and it's this way of viewing things, we call it like the economic way of thinking. And I think the power of this economic way of thinking is in how the discipline articulated principles and these ideas about how humans interact with each other in a social behavior, and with the systems also, like with institutions, with the government, and how these principles can be applied to the real world, of being able to take these tools of economic analysis and this way to think about the world, I find to be very powerful.
And how do we then approach specific problems, say, like in military manpower?
The problems in the manpower sphere is really, like the way to frame it is probably looking at the life cycle of a typical active duty service member, right? So from what are the policies that, that affect recruitment? And then from recruitment, then to retention, to promotion, how do we minimize destructive behaviors? And then there's retirement. And all these questions can be viewed through the lens of economics, whether it's in theory. By theory, it's asking questions like, are we providing the correct incentives to recruit, retrain, train even, train and educate, promote, as well as the retirement kind of incentives, so that we retain, so that we have the active duty service members that is the best match.
Okay, so what kind of principles can we employ here? You mentioned incentives. How does something like that relate to, say, opportunity costs?
So in a classroom, the most intuitive way to describe opportunity cost is I am asking the students, what else could you be doing with your time? Like you could be out there surfing instead of being in the classroom. And so then that's the opportunity cost of being inside the classroom. Or literally, if you had to put a dollar value on it, then it would be your next best alternative wage. And that is the opportunity cost of what you're currently doing right now for the same given period of time.
One of my favorite examples of this is when you're watching a terrible movie, but you force yourself to finish it anyway. You could totally stop halfway through and just do something more enjoyable, but you spend $1 at Redbox and you just can't walk away from it.
An economist would point out that cost is already sunk.
That's right, sunk cost bias, right?
Yes, yeah. So that's like a sunk cost, and so at the margin, the relevant comparison for opportunity cost is actually what else could you be doing with your time, instead of the $1 value that you've already sunk, because that's done.
So, Professor, you mentioned another of the economist's principles called thinking on the margins. Can you explain that phrase?
So the way an economist thinks on the margin is that, as we just pointed out, like with the sunk cost analogy, is that it's really the next unit, the next. So when say like you're looking at you're already full, and I guess this is still the movie thing, and there's one slice of pizza left. The cost of throwing out that pizza is not going to be the dollar value of the what you paid for the pizza, but actually that at the margin you're adding n number of calories to your intake, and so there's a cost to you of the marginal cost of that additional pizza is probably going to be higher than the marginal value of that last slice of pizza. So when we take this into policy evaluations, for example, economists that are trained to think on the margin look at the next dollar of investment, and that what is the value of that next dollar of investment as opposed to the cost of that additional dollar, right? And so when we say this is a worthwhile policy or a worthwhile investment, then the additional value of this $1 input brings back more than $1 in return.
So at some point we just hit diminishing returns, right?
That's right. And so a lot of the interesting cases happen when you've hit diminishing marginal returns right at that inflection point. I tell our students at NPS, for example, that most all students that show up on the first day of class, you can tell they're all type A's, right? They didn't get here by not being the best at what they were doing at some point. And so they're all so stressed. They have to get A's. They have to get everything right and all that stuff. And I see, and like some end up with having maybe conflicts at home or letting other personal aspects of life fall to the wayside. And so I use your marginal analysis here. You hit a diminishing returns at some point, right? Like that additional hour that you're spending studying or perfecting some, like code or whatever it is, that gain is worth less than an hour.
Right.
And there's an opportunity cost because you're neglecting something else that's actually relatively more valuable to you.
Earlier, I had mentioned calculating something like the elasticity of promotion. What is elasticity exactly, and how might it apply to this problem?
A way to think about elasticity is from just by definition, and elasticity basically is the percentage change in quantity, whatever that is, for every unit percentage change in the price for whatever that thing is. And so if it is about an elasticity in promotion, then perhaps whatever you think of as the y-axis, what you put on the y and the x-axis. So it's not just the slope, because it's unit invariant. With a slope, so I'm getting mathy here. With a slope, then it's really just a one-level change in the x variable, whatever is on the running, whatever you put on the axis. But elasticity is unit invariant, so it doesn't matter that you're looking at like a $1 change or because it's percentage change.
So maybe this would be a good example. Suppose you have a popular rock band that, right, they could just jack up the price for tickets to their show, but a less popular band couldn't because the percentage increase in price is just too high for the percentage of the population that's willing to pay for it. Is that right?
Yeah, and so we characterize the latter example as being relatively more elastic. They're
Right.
more sensitive to price changes relative to more inelastic. So when you think about, say, sensitivity to drug prices, so the really necessary drugs, then those are relatively more inelastic in term, or steeper slope, whereas the more elastic drugs would be things like vitamins and maybe other kinds of supplements.
So back to promotion, my back of the envelope math indicated that for the average Marine, pull-ups had the most elasticity. That is, that earning a single additional pull-up created the biggest change in cutting score towards promotion. But it seems to me that work performance or MOS proficiency should meet that criteria instead, and that the Marine Corps should incentivize that factor maybe more than the others.
I would want to look at the data, like actually, look at several years of data, get, if possible, the population of all Marines who went through the old system, and then going forward under this new system, do a before-after comparison. I would use what we call econometric tools, which are really data analysis, like statistics in economics. And so I would actually look at machine learning algorithms to estimate those elasticities and allow for not just how each of these inputs might enter on their own, but they might interact. Right? So somebody who is, because I would think that pull-ups are complemented or the height and weight might have something to do with the number of pull-ups that you can do, as an example, right? And so it's not just going to be at the margin, the marginal impact of a pull-up, but the interaction perhaps of height and weight with number of pull-ups.
So it turns out maybe the story is more complicated, right? Like, maybe my analysis might have been a little shallow because even though doing an extra pull-up might actually be most elastic, if the height and weight data shows that the amount of work required to earn that extra pull-up for some particular person or some set of Marines is actually very difficult, then perhaps that might be another factor.
That's right. And so we call this, that there could be these other omitted variables. It's not just that it's pull-ups. It might all be, we need to hold constant all these other things if we are going to try to identify what is the elasticity with respect to the marginal pull-up. I wouldn't call it shallow, however. So I would rewind that. It's not shallow. Having done back-of-the-envelope calculations myself, sometimes the data are what the data are, and that's the best thing we can do, and it's better to have something than nothing.
It turns out that we have a lot of data for this type of analysis. Hopefully, the kind of data one might use in the first place to build a promotion system that incentivizes the right attributes that we're looking for.
Sure. So and I don't have the exact numbers in front of me for the legacy system, but overall, the legacy system had a much higher percentage of where the score comes from that came from subjective criteria.
That's Major Alex Ryan again. So if the legacy system didn't hit the mark here, how is the new system, JPES, any different?
So after a lot of basically data analysis, after a lot of ability for me to being able to drive in, look at the data, we had some great people, great senior enlisted expertise as well that was on the team. And we're able to get a solution that was called, what we named was relative scoring.
How does relative scoring work? Using something simple like physical fitness, for example.
And that's what the JPES system does for a lot of these basic objective criteria and objective features, such as the PFT and the CFT. With what we do is we take all active duty, Lance Corporal, and Corporal CFTs and PFTs, and basically create similar what would be like a cumulative distribution function we learn about at the within the OR program. And we basically use a scale that's similar to like what you would take on the Iowa Test of Basic Skills, such as if you're in the 20th percentile, if you're in the 40th percentile, if you're in the 60th percentile. And when you do that, then you have a much better understanding and idea of So what does it take to be in the top 10%? And what we're able to do is basically build a table that translates this information into an easily digestible, machine readable, or basically marine readable format that allows a marine to be able to, or a machine to be able to identify exactly how well they are doing against their peers.
So now that you've converted all these measurables into distributions, how do you get the whole picture of the marine?
And the advantage to that is that then you can easily add those distributions up together, and you minimize the bias of adding different distributions with different means together. By transforming those distributions that are different into a common distribution, you can add them up, and then therefore it ensures that the amount that you're getting credit for your CFT is weighted approximately the same as what you're getting for a PFT, and is weighted about the same for what you're getting for your rifle.
Well, this certainly seems to solve a lot of problems of the old system. It means that my back-of-the-envelope math shouldn't edge out pull-ups over other metrics, at least not in general. This means that Marines can make more effective decisions about where to focus, say in areas where they can make big gains, either by moving up in the distribution or in areas where they have a large propensity for improvement to begin with. But there's still the issue of the subjective evaluation of Marines' performance. For that, let's go back to Maj Rob Wells. So, Rob, what was the big issue with the legacy system, and how did JPES address those problems?
Right, but the guidance for pro cons in the IRAM, which is the manual that covers a lot of administrative functions to include pro cons, was written several decades ago. And if you went in there, it just wasn't the guidance about where to mark Marines just isn't really in line with today's Marines, right? Because it was written such a long time ago. So one of the consequences of that was you have, again, Marines getting the same marks within a very narrow margin, and that doesn't really do a very good job of breaking out Marines from one another. So you have duplicate composite scores, which also has the secondary effect of closed out MOSs. And, it's just that the system, in theory, it worked, but, just looking at the data and the efforts to modernize performance evaluation and talent management, it was time for a new system.
Some of the other complaints about the legacy system is that many of the other quantifiable data like rifle scores, PFT, CFT scores, etc., were essentially double counted in the proficiency mark. So how does JPES, how has that changed to combat those issues?
Okay, yeah, great question. So, one of the things about JPES that we kind of hammer home every time is that 75% of that Marine score is objective and is on that Marine. It's pulled directly out of McTIFs for what they have for individual training, PME, MarineNet, self-education, right? So that the majority of that PES score is just pulled unemotionally directly out of McTIFs, right? And then the command has that 25%. To do the subjective piece of the evaluation in character, MOS, mission accomplishment, and leadership. Now, if you go into the order for those three attributes in the command input, that the language does steer more towards especially on the MOS proficiency side. How the Marines doing, in their job and their community. Now there is a little bit of overlap on some things, just when it comes to setting the example and having, being fit and those kind of things can translate over to leadership. But the order makes it pretty clear that we want, the Marine gets the 75% from McTIFs, and then the command, really zeroes in on that Marine's performance on the subjective side with the command input metrics.
In speaking with Professor Bacolod, an economics professor here at MPS, she suggested that taking data from the legacy system and JPES and conducting some sort of direct comparison or analysis would be really useful. Has anything like that been attempted?
Major Ryan, Alex Ryan, actually had a big part in this. He did take what we were proposing, right, to put in, make the metrics of the PES score and the weighting, and applied that to the current population at that time of eligible lance corporals and corporals for promotion. Now he couldn't completely simulate it just based off of how the command input works, with it being just 25%, and then also the guidance in the for the command input is now what was formerly the quote average Marine 4.2, 4.3, depending on your unit, now translates right down the middle to 2.5. Okay, so he, with that guidance, he ran the numbers, so to speak, with the data, and what we found was that we at least in the simulation, we were getting balanced Marines, right, who are strong performers in all four areas of the four pillars of JPES, which are warfighting, physical toughness, mental agility, and command input. The command input part is where we had to do the most artificiality, I think. Again, just because we're kind of resetting the scale, but there was some testing done beforehand, and the estimation was that we would get high quality Marines who are balanced in all four areas.
And what kind of post-implementation analysis has been conducted?
And that is definitely a priority, to look at the data, in reality now, and see, if we have Marines who are getting promoted with, say, really high mental agility, or maybe does war fighting, does that pillar kind of have an outsized impact?
And how do other areas of Manpower play into this? For example, is retention going to play into this new program? Does JPES feed information into, say, re-enlistment packages?
No, absolutely. So integration with the retention side of the house, that was one of the initial objectives of JPES. Kind of phase one being replace pro-cons and the composite score. Phase two being integration with the retention re-enlistment process.
There's a huge section of students here at MPS. They're studying data analysis, economics, etc. Are there any open research questions at Manpower right now that might be useful as a resource for an MPS student, say, looking for a thesis project here, that they might be able to help you guys answer?
Maybe, not sure how to do it right now, but look at, is JPES incentivizing Marines to perform the way we think it does, and maybe how that how does that relate to the mature the force initiative, right? Because essentially for a Marine to be a sergeant, they're going to have to re-enlist, so that's something as well to look at.
Well, thanks to Rob and Ryan for helping us figure out how this program got started and some of the thought process that went into it. Well, it's funny how, to the uninitiated, the solutions to the world's problems just seem so obvious. But the more you dig into these complicated and very often nuanced issues, I think the more generally we find smart, hardworking people trying to solve them. And the problems are always so much more complicated than we initially imagined. I think my complaint about our legacy system was a valid one, and while my envelope math didn't solve anything, it at least quantified a potential weakness in that system. And I'm thankful to both Alex and Rob and all the other Marines who actually did something about it, instead of just complaining to their staff and later making a podcast about it. Thank you also for coming on the show. Most of this episode was recorded over the last year, so JPES has been around long enough now to dig into the data and evaluate what is going on and what's happened with the new system implementation. I'm looking forward to a follow-up episode, hopefully soon, to answer that question. And lastly, I'd also like to thank Professor Bacolod for taking the time to chat about economics, something that she's obviously passionate about. Normally, when I end an episode, I ask the guest to give MPS students a piece of advice, and we ended up getting some great advice, though it came unexpectedly at the very beginning of our interview. And so with that, I'll leave you with her comments and look forward to our next episode together. And I want to lead off with an easy question, and that is, you are a professional economist. And when people who are not economists find that out about you, what is the first question you get?
What's a good stock to invest in? And so my typical response has been pay off all your credit cards. And it's really because most credit cards charge an interest rate of, maybe about 15%, if not higher, right? And so on a good year, a good stock, an index fund might yield you 10%. And so it's really way more worth it, knowing with certainty that you're cutting off that upwards of 15% APR credit card debt. And so don't think about the stock market if you carry more than zero balance on your monthly credit card bills.
Thanks for joining us in the Trident Room. For more information about today's guests and topics, please visit the show notes. The Trident Room has been brought to you by the Naval Postgraduate School Alumni Association and Foundation. For questions, comments, and suggestions, please email us at tridentroompodcasthost@nps.edu and find us online at nps.edu/Trident Room